We are at the time of the art market industrialization. And it's very dangerous because we've seen other sectors that have been submitted to industrialization in culture, and the result was not always very good. So the museums are in a difficult situation right now. Is the acquisition budget are very small. I see also too often, particularly in the US, that this and this museum acquired this work, which is totally wrong, because most of the time it's a gift, which means that it needs to be gifted in some way. So of course, curators can have some influence in what that gift can be and so on. But I see too often, I mean, I know some museum directors in the States that are getting offer for gift every single day, and the main answer is no, because the quality of what is offered is not good. I think today's time, and that's why I'm 21st century or even 22nd century, when I see a lot of my fellow collectors and even the museum directors I'm talking to, is that we must open the dialogue, because the situation has changed. There's been a privatization of culture. Museums have no money, but they have exhibition space, and the collectors have got money and the works. So there must be a win-win situation with rules for ethics to be put in place, but that's the way of the future.
We actually have pretty strict guidelines of conflict of interest and involvement with sponsorship and lenders and all sorts of things. So we already have guidelines and rules in place. I think for us, the issue is really that the programming has to come from the idea and the scholarship, and ultimately the curator and the museum and the artist. And I think that, you know, obviously it's a complex ecology that we all deal with. And I think collectors are very much within the museum ecology. In fact, if one of your questions earlier, when you were talking about the idea of artist investment, I couldn't help but think actually that, you know, a large part of our work at the museum is, yes, working with artists, creating programming, exhibitions, but it's also community building. And I think that, you know, collectors are one part of that important community that we are really engaged in building around the museum. And so I often say to collectors, you know, the museums are one of the few forums where the museums are not involved in any shape or form in having an advantage to whether you buy, sell, or don't. I mean, it's not a commercial activity for us. So I think for us, you know, that's our focus, that we really try to stay working with the artist and in building these communities of appreciation around the work.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. I mean, the primary thing with any exhibitions really is the show and the art. I mean, you cannot, I mean, you know, realistically cut out the commercial aspect and the conflict aspect. As long as you have the rules in place, certain basic rules in place, I think, you know, those are kind of precautions to take. But primarily, if the museums themselves and the curators themselves feel this is an important show to do, and we need to borrow this work from a private collector who happens to be commercially minded, or a gallery, I think that's just part and parcel of the price you pay for education. As long as I think the museum is honest and is you know, serious about its mission, I think you cannot reasonably kind of cut out the you know, 100% the conflict. Of course, some rules must be put in place. I mean, you can't have, you know, every show borrowing from the same collector, for instance. I mean, there must be some rules in place, some limits. I think you cannot cut it out.
I agree with the notion of ecosystem. It's extremely important, this notion of ecosystem that Melissa mentions. And but for this ecosystem to work, is that different parts must be looking at the other parties like a valuable partner. And it happens too often still that certainly from the museum side to the collectors, that they don't consider collectors as a valid counterpart, except for as a checkbook that they need desperately. So we've got a nice smile until the check is signed. But it's you know, everyone must partner around the table in good faith from the from the collectors, the artists, the museums, the media, and so on, because we need to find a way to preserve art, the art that we need to preserve for the next generation, in the shadow of the art market industrialization, because we cannot change and beat that art market industrialization process, but we must find a way of collaborating to preserve the art that is worth preserving. It's all that complex navigation of the ecosystem, which is the consequence of only one thing, is that the state has decided that culture had to find their way commercially. And I'm sorry to say, but that's as we see it for television and movies. If we let only the commerce decide what will be shown, we go to a lowest common denominator, opening the way to catastrophe.